As you've seen, Liz Truss has been fired. The Chancellor was fired a week ago, and all his policies, his tax cuts and her tax cuts, they were trashed a week ago, and there's going to be a new Prime Minister. Neither of these people, neither Liz Truss nor Kwasi Kwarteng, were fired by Parliament or by Tory MPs. They were fired by the Bank of England. Not because the Bank of England are a bunch of bad guys, but because the economic conditions are so bad that the Bank of England is forced into that position. And this was not caused by the war in Ukraine. It was not caused by coronavirus. It is people waking up to the idea that debt matters at the same time that people wake up to the idea that it is a bad thing for the whole of Western economies everywhere to be stuffed with debt. Every aspect of every Western economy is completely stuffed with debt, like the face of an aging Hollywood actress, or like the buttocks of some female rap star. And there is no way out of this. There is no way to right the ship. There is nothing that the authorities can do that will work, or that we will allow them to do. If you want a picture of the economy now moving forward, imagine a ship that is loaded down with barrels of water, and the edges of the boat, the gunnels, are below the waterline of the river, so it's letting in water, and the crew don't have the equipment, don't have the strength to bail the water out of the boat. All they can do is fill up more barrels and stack those barrels of water on top of the existing barrels, weighing the boat down, and then beg the captain to steer a steady, smooth course over the waterfall. And imagine that the boat is also tied to a whole load of other boats. That is the picture you have of the economy now. It can't change, it can't get better, and it will break down. And I'm sticking to the prediction that I rashly made, which is saying that around 2026, maybe as late as 2027, it will become widely realised that the economy has stage 4 cancer, can't peel its own oranges, lying in bed with a load of uneaten grapes on the side table, and that will mean sometime around the end of this decade, that economic collapse will lead to political system collapse. And that collapse, that breakdown, that is what will save so many of our problems, including the problem, you might think the unrelated problem, of multicultural invasion. None of these problems are going to be solved by politics, by parliament, or by legislation. They will be solved by breakdown. Okay, so as we know, Kwasi Kwarteng there, let me just show you him with Liz Truss. He was fired just a week ago, on Friday the 14th of October. Kwasi Kwarteng, PM's vision was right, says sacked Chancellor. He's been sacked as Chancellor amid intense speculation Prime Minister Liz Truss is about to junk key parts of their economic plan. And that certainly is what happened. And what happened is that the pair of them, Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, that they did a mini budget, as you probably know, saying we're going to slash taxes and we're going to increase spending. So spending on fuel subsidy and cutting a whole range of taxes, including corporation tax and the basic rate of income tax and the top rate of income tax. And that was said to leave a £60 billion hole in public finances. That's been upgraded to a £72 billion hole. And the response to that from the markets was not what they expected, not what has happened over the last 10, 20 or 40 years. During this credit boom, when people have been saying that debt matters, suddenly the people who lend to the British government by buying government bonds, they started to say to themselves, we don't like lending to you. You've got too much debt. You're planning to take on a whole load more debt. If we're going to lend to you, we want extra interest to compensate us for that risk. And that is what happened. That is this graph here. If I show you that, Bank of England boosts plan to calm market turmoil. I'll explain what that is in a second, but that is the interest rate. So there you see on the 23rd of September, that mini budget is announced, and the interest rate goes up from just above 3.5% to nearly 5% in less than a week, in a few days. And that has all kinds of effects. That means that the central bank, the Bank of England, have to intervene, and they do. They say, right, what the Bank of England had been doing is saying, we are going to try and reduce inflation and increase interest rates by taking money out of the economy, by selling bonds into the economy. And then the value of bonds plummeted, the interest rate on the bonds went up, and the Bank of England had to change course on a dime and commit itself to buying a whole load of government bonds to keep the price of those bonds up. First it said it will buy £5 billion worth of bonds a day, then it said we'll buy £10 billion worth of bonds a day, and then they said actually we're going to buy other assets as well. And they did that around the 28th, 29th of September, and then the interest rate on bonds fell, but gradually it started to creep back up again. And when the interest rates of bonds goes up, the price of bonds goes down. That's the thing to remember. I don't want to get too nerdy and technical here. You can do easily. I don't want to do that. But that was a problem for the economy. It was a problem for interest rates rocketing, which had wider effects on the national and international economy. The main problem was, or the immediate problem was, with pension funds. Breakdown always begins right at the edge, right at the periphery. Think of a flag fluttering in the wind. It starts to fray at the edges. You don't know which edge is going to fray first, but you know at one of the edges is where the flag is going to fray. And that's what happens with the economy. And the pensions are on the edge, the debt-laden edge of a peripheral economy, which is what the UK economy has become. Now, those pension funds, they've got to pay out money to retired people, to pensioners, and they want to keep their investments safe. The idea is they're really safe, and they're going to pay out a reliable sum every money that people can rely on and not worry about. And so what they invest in is supposedly safe investments, and that is bonds. And that's traditionally what they've done. So 50 or 100 years ago, they would simply, you pay into a pension, that pension fund buys government bonds, the government bonds pay interest, and the interest accumulates, and when you come to retire, there's enough money in the pot to keep paying you your pension every month. And but what has happened with the growth of debt, every aspect of the economy, including pension funds, has taken on the idea that debt is good. As interest rates have gone lower and lower and lower for the last 40 years, the idea has accumulated that you can do everything and make money. You can speculate on asset values using debt, and that is the smart way to do things. And pension funds have done that as well. So in order to charge pension holders less money, what they've done is that they've only put about a quarter to a third of their money into buying and holding government bonds. The rest of the money is effectively got into betting on the price of government bonds and the interest rate on government bonds, effectively betting that the value of the bonds will go up and that the interest rates will go down, because over the long term that's what's happened for the last 40 years. And what they do is, with the rest of their money, they speculate on that. They don't buy the actual bonds, they bet on the price and interest rates of those bonds. And what has happened is, suddenly, when you had that sudden upswing in interest rates there, what that meant was the interest rates went up, which meant that the value of the bonds went down, and suddenly those pension funds are making big losses. And they're making these bets, these deals with banks. And so the banks say, you're making big losses here, you have got to put up money in order to show us that you're good for those losses, to make sure that we'll get our money out of you. And the only thing that those pension funds have to sell is the bonds that they're holding on the side. So if they sell those in order to be able to meet margin calls, i.e. to pay off the money, to show that they're good for the money that they're going to owe to the banks that they've made the bets with, they have to sell off the bonds that they're holding. And that dumps the price of bonds even further, increases the interest rate that lenders will demand government bonds even further. So you get into a downward spiral, a vicious cycle. What the press refer to as a fire sale of government bonds. The more you sell, the more the price goes down. The more the price goes down, the more the pension funds have to sell. And this is the way the press were putting it. This is Reuters. British pension funds step up fire sales as need for cash soars. So UK pension schemes are racing to raise hundreds of billions of pounds to shore up derivatives positions. Those derivatives are what's called repos and swaps, basically betting on the value of bonds and the interest rate on bonds, before the Bank of England calls time on support at keeping them afloat. And it really was a fire sale. It was serious. If I go to the next story, this is from the Financial Times. Let me just see if I can go in there. The Bank of England launches 65 billion move to calm markets. Central bank to spend 5 billion a day. Initially it was 5 billion. They soon put it up to 10 billion for 13 days. So it was for a fixed period over material risk to UK financial stability and threat to pensions. Now, the point of this article is to show how serious the problem was. If I go down there, this is one of the financiers who works with the pension funds. What he said is, if there was no intervention today, this was back in late September, gilt yields, that's UK bond interest rates, could have gone up to 7 to 8% from 4.5% this morning. And in that situation, around 90% of UK pension funds, 90% would have run out of collateral. Running out of collateral, that's a technical way to say they would have had nothing left in the pot. All they would have had is the deals that they've made with banks that they've lost money on. So they would have gone broke, they would have gone bust. They would have been wiped out. That's how serious it was. You imagine 90% of pension funds, I assume that means all pension funds, not just the ones that are paying out sort of final salary, gold-plated pensions. Imagine that they suddenly go bust. That would have been a really bad deal. And there would have been a lot of knock-on effects. That then would have taken down the banks that they were dealing with, because I think it's 1.6 trillion pounds that those pension funds are dealing with. And if they have a huge, massive, great loss, or money that they owe to those banks that they can't pay to those banks then go insolvent, those banks then fall over, those banks then have to be bailed out by central government. Central government just can't afford to do that again. It was so unpopular last time. People hate the idea of bailing out the banksters, as they're called. And that is the second aspect of how serious the problem was. The first is how big the problem was in this country. 90% of UK pension funds apparently facing being wiped out. And the second thing is it would have infected or knocked over other financial institutions, the domino effect. So the banks they were dealing with, they might have gone bust. And the second one is American commercial corporate bonds, where companies, instead of lending money to the government in the form of a bond, you lend to a company, a commercial company, in the form of a bond. Now this one, will the UK financial chaos spark a wider meltdown? That's the news report from nearly a week ago from the BBC. The recent chaos on UK financial markets has generated waves of stress and selling by investors far beyond the UK. And it goes on, it talks about mortgage rates. So it's banks, mortgage rates, i.e. the housing market, and commercial bond sellers in the States, companies trying to raise money via bonds in the US. If I show you this article from the Wall Street Journal there, the UK crisis spills into US junk debt. Collateralized loan obligation, that's loans chopped up like spam and lumped together. Loan obligation prices have been hit hard by a slump in the British pound and the unwinding of UK pension investments. So if people can get higher interest rates by lending money to the UK government, they're not going to lend to American companies so much. They're going to say to American companies, you've got to pay higher interest rates, and those companies can't afford it. It's a big bubble in the States. The big bubble in debt, everything is stuffed with debt. It's a bubble everywhere, but the really extreme bubbles are in government debt, commercial or corporate debt, and then student loan debt and auto debt, car debt, and commercial debt or corporate debt. That is the really big bubble that'll pop, because a lot of the companies, they are, well, it's called junk debt. They're not that financially sound, and it's just confidence that's holding up their debt. So what happened there is fallout from the crisis in the UK financial markets has hit a faraway corner of Wall Street, the $1 trillion market for collateralized loan obligations. It was, and it says that CLOs are now widely held by investors around the world. So if you imagine if those commercial bonds went broke, then the investment companies, other banks that invest in American commercial debt, they might have faced falling over as well. So it was a crisis that could, if it had been allowed to run, could have taken down large parts of the global economy. It was propped up by the Bank of England. The Bank of England had no choice. It hated it, but it did it for a short while. And the next one, mortgage rates hit fresh 14-year highs. And this is another knock-on effect. Mortgage rates continued to climb on Thursday. That's one day ago, so that's today's story, hitting their highest levels in 14 years, figures show. So the 2-year and 5-year rate, they're both over 6.5%. Now, a year ago, those mortgage rates were probably about 1.5%. A year before that, they were probably around about 1%. So I mean, they have gone up a lot in the last couple of years, the last 2 or 3 years, and that means that people are even less able to afford to buy their own homes. That threatens property prices. That in turn threatens the mortgage companies that have lent to property owners, because if the property price crashes, you get a lot of people with negative equity who just walk away from their home loans, and then you have another banking crisis. So the knock-on effects are severe. Just to show you what I mean, look at the front page of the BBC, their business tab there. Pound sinks as UK economic uncertainty rises. And these are the top 3 stories. Millions of people struggling to pay their bills. That's with inflation. And then I worry about affording rent, because as people can't afford to buy their own houses, people need to rent. There's more demand for rental properties. There's already a shortage of rental properties, so rents go through the ceiling. It is hitting people. So there was no way the Bank of England could avoid intervening. If it hadn't, things would have gone belly up fast. And the Bank of England really hated it, and through gritted teeth said, we're only going to do this for a short time. We are only going to do this until the 14th of October. That's last Friday. And this is the story. The Bank of England's Bailey, that's the chair of the Bank of England, has messages for funds. You have 3 days to wind up positions. Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey warned fund managers. Now, he addressed this to pension fund managers. That's nonsense. He was addressing it to the government. He was addressing it to Liz Truss. This is just over a week ago. Fund managers, they have until the end of the week to wind up positions that they can't maintain before the central bank halts its market support, triggering a sell-off in the pounds and US stocks. And then this from The Guardian. Pound falls sharply against the dollar after the bank confirms bond buying end date. So what you have there is the governor of the Bank of England saying, we will prop up the value of UK bonds, and we will try and keep interest rates low on those bonds. We're only going to do it temporarily, and the markets didn't believe it. The markets basically, the pound has fallen sharply against the dollar after Andrew Bailey warned the Bank of England would not extend its emergency intervention to financial markets beyond this week after the turmoil sparked by the government's mini-budget. They described it as being a message to the pension funds saying, get your act together. You've got to rearrange all your financial portfolios. There's no way those pension funds could do that within a week. Hundreds of billions of pounds and rearrange their investments effectively, and in order to make a profit within a week. It's going to take them much longer than that. His message was to the government, effectively then to the Prime Minister, saying, we're going to yank our support on Friday the 14th of October. You have got to fire your Chancellor by that date, because we're not going to prop you up any longer than that. And you have not only got to fire your Chancellor, you have got to trash your tax-cutting policies. And the government complied. On the afternoon of Friday the 14th of October, Kwarteng, here he is there, I'll show you the picture, Kwarteng, he gets fired. So there he is. Kwarteng has been sacked as Chancellor, and that was on the 14th of October. And then by the following Monday morning, his replacement, Jeremy Hunt, gets up and he says, and he just ditches pretty much every one of the tax cuts. So the problem is that the economy is so bad, it's in such bad shape, it is stuffed with debt at a time when the attitude towards debt is turning 180 degrees. People are now starting to worry about debt, whereas they haven't done for decades. And that means that the economy is very vulnerable. That puts the Bank of England in the hot seat. And that means that the Bank of England effectively fired Kwasi Kwarteng, fired and trashed Liz Truss's policies. That doesn't mean that the Bank of England are a bunch of bad people. It just means that they're forced into that position. Now, what I want to look at is why this has happened, how it has come to be like that. And because there's a lot of nonsense talks about, it's Putin's fault because he invaded Ukraine. That's caused the inflation. That's caused the spike in interest rates. That's caused or that COVID caused all the money printing, etc. That's nonsense. COVID didn't have a money printing press. Now, to show you this, let me show you a table of UK bank interest. UK interest rates. If you see there, that's about just over 2 years ago. I think about 2 years ago, interest rates were then they were about or interest on bonds. It was about 0.25%. A year ago, it was just under 1%, and it's just steadily risen and risen and risen. And February 24th, that was about there. Then that's when Putin or Russia invaded Ukraine. You can see that interest rates were already rising. I can probably show it better on this little bar chart here. This is what just shows the last year. So in October of 2021, interest rates 4.2%, and you can see they were rising and rising and rising. There's January, there's February. Right at the end of February, Russia invades Ukraine. It probably takes about a month for the effects of that to ripple through into inflation. So March of this year, inflation rate, yeah, that's right. Inflation rate was 7%. So you can see that the curve is rising upward. I would guess that the war in Ukraine probably added an additional 1% to that curve, which was happening anyway. It's been happening for about 2.5 years. That inflation rate has been going up, and with it, interest rates. It was not caused by the invasion of Ukraine. And if we go to I look at the US inflation rate. Same thing there. You see in October 2021, 6.2%, and then January, February, March, 8.5%. Actually, after the invasion of Ukraine, the US inflation rate went down a bit, and then about level. Then it went up to 9.1, and then it's coming back down again there. I find it even harder to see how US inflation was affected by the invasion of Ukraine. It might have added 0.5% to American inflation rates, not much. That's not what has caused the inflation. Now, the other thing that's often put forward is, or the excuse that politicians make, is look at COVID. It forced us to put us into a whole load of power-grabbing, stupid and counterproductive lockdowns, and they had to be paid for, so we had to print a load of money, and that is what has caused the inflation. No, that's not the case either. I'll before I say what I think it was, I want to show you this graph. That is basically the sort of money printing index. That's what's called the Federal Reserve balance sheet in America. How many dollars the Central Bank of America has put into the economy. Now, that big spike there, that was money printed and spent into the economy for in response to all the lockdowns. But that money printing had already begun about 6 months earlier, September 2019. Technically, this was kicked off by a problem with banks refusing to lend to each other overnight. Suddenly saying we're not going to lend to other banks overnight, which is what really for decades and decades, or a century, that's what banks have done, just to tide each other to make sure the other banks are solvent overnight. And they stopped doing that, and so the Federal Reserve, the central bank, had to start printing money in order to be able to lend to banks who weren't prepared to lend to each other. And then you had a load of printing as a result of the coronavirus lockdowns. I certainly think that the response to coronavirus accelerated that, but I think something else was happening. What I suspect was happening, no one can explain, incidentally, that problem in September of 2019, the banks no longer lending to each other overnight, what's called the repo crisis. I haven't heard any very rational, detailed explanation of that. It just seems to me to have been a change in mentality. What seems to me to have happened is that over decades, Western economies have taken on more and more and more debt, absolutely stuffing themselves to the gills with debt. And then at a certain point, mentality changes and people look around themselves and realise there's too much debt, and debt is a problem. Suddenly people start going from a position where they say debt doesn't matter, you can always take on more of it, the interest rate is so low and it's going lower, and that the assets that you can buy with it will go up in price anyway, so you'll make more money than the debt costs you. So debt doesn't matter, it's smart, it's shrewd to take on lots of debt. Changing from that attitude to an attitude where people say, hold on, this is a problem, this is risky. These levels of debt are so high they can never get repaid. I'm not comfortable lending to other people, and that means interest rates rise as lenders become much more cautious. And I think that's just about a change in mentality. And I would pinpoint that as pivoting in the autumn of 2019. And what that has led to is, if I bring up this this chart again, that's the Federal Reserve balance sheet, the number of dollars pumped into the American economy by the American Central Bank. That chart is almost identical if you look at the chart for the number of pounds put into the British economy by the Bank of England. And what happened after the 2008 crisis is a lot of money got printed and lent into the economy. The central bank basically would print up money, and then it would go to commercial banks and say, you can borrow this money. So we have the asset of the loan we've made to you, and you take that money and then you lend it at a higher interest rate to commercial businesses, who then do things with it, make money, or usually just invest in assets, shares, invest in government bonds, but basically not investing so much in the economy, but pumping that money into assets. So, and that didn't create inflation. People were happy with that. People, or the rich people who got it, were comfortable with that. It meant they could stuff it into assets that rose sharply in value. And in return, there was a lot of debt overhanging the economy, and that debt overhang, that suppressed inflation, that suppressed a lot of economic activity. It might have created the wealth effect with people's assets going up in value, but it suppressed general day-to-day economic activity. So you had much, much lower growth, because that's what debt does. It crushes economic growth. But that seemed to work, because you had central banks that could print money, pump it into the economy by lending it to banks and to businesses, and it wasn't creating inflation. And that seems to have changed. That changed. That mentality has changed, where people looking at the economy are saying, I'm not really comfortable with all this debt. I might not want to take on any more debt, and I don't want to lend money to other people. And also a change in mentality amongst the wider public, saying, why the hell should you print up all this money and lend it to banks to enrich people who are already rich, the asset holders? Poor people are not asset holders, it's the rich who are asset holders. Supposedly, in fact, actually, the top 1%. Why are you printing all this money to enrich them. And so that idea of printing and lending money into the economy, that was replaced by printing and spending money into the economy, because printing and lending into the economy just stopped working so well. People were, the debt markets weren't working so well. People were getting tired of the levels of debt, and the public, it was becoming very unpopular with the public as well. So politicians didn't want to do it. And to give you an example, so what has changed then is the big change is from printing and lending money into the economy to printing and spending into the economy. And that, just to give you an example of that, that's what happened in the UK during the coronavirus pandemic. The Bank of England to finance UK COVID-19 crisis spending. That looks like an innocuous, windy Guardian article title, but what it talks about is direct funding, where the Bank of England simply prints money. It doesn't lend it to the government, it just hands it to the government, it gives it to the government. That is traditionally the big taboo in financial policy, i.e. monetizing debt, just printing up money to pay off your debts. But that is what happened in Britain during the coronavirus crisis. It has been, seems to have been memory holed by the internet. But I mean, this is what positive money. I would call them a progressive left. I'd say they're a left wing. I would describe them as a left wing think tank around financial matters. And direct monetary financing, i.e. printing money and passing it to the government, allows the government to deliver the necessary spending to save lives, while reassuring the public that they will not be overburdened with future debt payments, i.e. the government gets the money, but it's just given to it. It doesn't have a debt that has to be paid interest on, i.e. by taxing the public. And it's very difficult to find a lot of information about this. I found a Financial Times article, but I can't find it anymore. I don't know if it's disappeared. But the amount that was printed up was half $1 trillion. So there's this was observed by an economist I like called Lacey Hunt in the States. He's quite well known, well respected. But he basically says here that the Bank of England made a direct advance to the British Treasury of approximately $500 billion. And that was a temporary measure, but you know what happens with government temporary measures. And I think that is why the UK inflation rate is so much higher than it is in other countries, because the Bank of England, the UK authorities really embraced the idea of just printing and spending money into the economy. And that is a big change. That follows on from the mentality of people being uncomfortable with ever-increasing debt. That tide of opinion, it's like an underlying psychology as regards debt. That tide has turned. And to give you an illustration, I want to show you this this graph here. Again, this is nerdy stuff, but what I want to show is in general the feeling about interest rates. It rises, it comes and goes in waves. And this is American interest rates. You see one wave, they're high interest rates. They're around 1795, going down to about 1830, 1835, or maybe even 1840, and back up to about 1845. They spike up there, and then they go down. And then about 1920, they're back up at a high point there, and they go down to about 1950, and then back up to the 1980s. You see those waves of interest rates going up and down, and the same. That graph only goes up to about 2015, but the high point in 1981, 1982, when interest rates, American interest rates, hit about 14.5%, 15%, and then down to about 2020, when they went down to about, I think about 0.5%, no, about 1/10%. So, and now they're going back up again, and that is what we are facing, just a wave, that wave of interest rates rising again. And the mentality, the underlying psychologist, I can't entirely explain it. That has changed, as well as the actions of central government and central bank authorities. And the change is, in crude terms, people are not saying debt is a good thing, you get rich on it. People are saying debt is a bad thing, it drags you down, makes you poor. People are scared of it. People are take on scared to take on more of it, and people are scared to lend to people who are already in debt. And so you're getting rising interest rates. And you're also getting a change from central banks printing and lending into the economy to central banks printing and spending money into the economy, just in order to rescue the economy, to save it. As happened over the last couple of weeks, it wasn't entirely printed and spent. It was that the central bank bought up government bonds, but it was a central bank rescue plan nonetheless. And what I'm trying to say here is the problem is not only very serious and has wider ranging, the ripples of it have wider ranging effects. There isn't really anything. It's a long and increasing progression. There isn't anything that governments can do to arrest it. What they can't do is what they've tried over the last few weeks, and that is to slash taxes in order to get the economy to grow on the basis that government debt will increase. Yes, that's fine, but tax rates will go down and the economy will boom. A decade ago, 5 years ago, that might have worked because lenders were saying we don't mind lending to governments because the interest rates that they have to pay are going down and down and down. That means that the value of the bond, if we lend to them, the value goes up, so our asset is increasing in value. And as their interest rates go down and down and down, governments have to shell out less and less in order to keep rolling their debt over. So that might have worked 5 or 10 years ago. It is not working now. So they can't just slash taxes. That's what we've learned. The other one is, can they slash spending? Well, that one looks unlikely as well. Let me show you this story. That's from the Institute of Fiscal Studies, and they're a response to the Chancellor's mini budget reversals. Now, he reversed the tax cuts. He's going to come out on Halloween and to say what spending cuts he's going to impose. And I wonder if they're going to cause disturbances in the streets. I'll explain why in a minute. But what the Institute for Fiscal Studies are saying is, our analysis suggested that a tightening of around 60 billion was needed to have debt falling as a share of national income in the medium term. That was when after Kwasi Kwarteng's mini budget, there was a hole in the budget of 60 billion, and in the medium term. Well, press reports suggest that the OBR's analysis since then points to a larger gap of 72 billion. Either way, today's 32 billion of tax rises would only take the Chancellor part way there. Yeah, not even halfway there. Where is he going to find 40 billion of cuts in spending? Now, to give you an example of that, of where we are, I don't think he can do that because everyone's flat to the boards. Everyone's got their back to the wall, and everyone is pressing government to spend more money. I think there are some people who are in real trouble and probably need that help. Look at this story from the 12th of October. Recession risk rises as economy unexpectedly shrinks. So you've got inflation rising at the same time, so prices are going up at the same time as recession coming in and the economy shrinking. So people losing their jobs, people getting paid less, people getting poorer, and prices going up. That means people expect government welfare claims on the government are going to go up. That is, what can government do? That is what's called mandatory spending. Government has to provide, legislation provides that government has to provide welfare payments in those circumstances. They can't cut that. It was very difficult for them to do so. Long-term sickness is highest on record, 2.5 million. Incidentally, those are people who are invalided out of the workforce. That looks to me to be 2.5 times the number of invalids that were put into British society as a result of World War One. So, but anyway, those people, they need to be paid for. Are you going to cut what you pay to them? What will they then do? Or look at this, the health service. West's hospitals, that's from the 7th of October, the West's hospitals under pressure ahead of winter. So glad, good job, it's only the West then. No, tell a lie. Health services in the South are under severe pressure. Okay, so it doesn't end there. And let's look at this. A record number of nurses quitting the NHS. That's because they're not being paid enough. How do you arrest that? You have to pay them a bit more. That's the way you attract more people to become nurses. And then, and this finally, this deals with, the basic problem is there is nowhere to cut. Are you going to cut payments to the health services? Are you going to close hospitals? How are you then going to deal with riots in the streets if that happens? Are you going to cut pension payments? Are you going to cut welfare payments? If you do, will people on welfare, how are you going to stop them rioting? Now, but it goes deeper than that. It goes to cultural attitudes that we have. And on the same day that the Bank of England was saying we're going to expand our bond purchases from 5 to 10 billion in order to rescue the pension funds, but we're only going to do it for 3 more days. Jamie Oliver, he comes out, give more children free school meals. This is a cultural thing. 100 years ago, or in the Victorian era, if you were a rich celebrity and you wanted people to admire you, you wanted popularity, which is what rich people want that, then you didn't go and ask for the government to do something. You went out and you paid for something to happen. You paid for poor people to have free school meals. But today, if you're rich and you want, quite like being admired, you front a campaign to press the government to shell out that money to buy meals for free school meals. And he's talking about free school breakfast as well, I think, school breakfast and school lunches. So, and this is, I'm not trying to single out Jamie Oliver there. It doesn't seem like a bad guy to me in any way. I like his recipes. But what I'm pointing out is this is the cultural assumption that pervades society. If there's a problem, government can, should and will step up and put in more money to fund it. And the government will find it's battling against that embedded expectation that has been going for the best part of a century. The government will sort out problems like this. And you cannot cut spending in the face of those expectations, those long ingrained cultural habits. So the point I want to make is partly the seriousness of the economic problems facing this country and most of the Western world, but also the fact that governments just don't have any room for manoeuvre. They can't cut taxes. I don't think there's any way they can cut spending. If they do, they're going to get riots in the streets. People vote for government, people vote for welfare, people vote for management of the economy so that their wages will stay stable or go up. That is what people vote for. People don't vote for civilization, people vote for survival. It's not because we're a bunch of materialistic parasites, it's because we are hardwired, we are evolved to survive first. That is our primary aim, our primary drive. It's no surprise, and that means, what that means is that in a big state, welfare state society, that means looking to the state to sort out the economy, looking to the state to maintain public spending, looking to the state to maintain welfare spending. If government says its job now is to reduce that spending, the attitude is going to be that the government is taking money away from us. And that is not what governments are expected to do. That's not what governments are voted into power to do. That's not what people agree to submit to governments in return for. What we basically say is, okay, you provide for us, we will let you get on with ruling us. And if governments start cutting spending, cutting welfare payments, people are going to start saying to themselves, okay, the game's up, the deal's off. We don't have to submit to your authority. And you will see riots in the streets. And, well, wait and see what happens after Halloween when the Chancellor, whoever he is then, is going to announce his spending cut plans. The wider point for me is that the Western economies are headed for collapse. They are stuffed with debt. They've taken on so much debt, really since the early 80s, but especially in the last 20 years, and especially since 2008. It has been seen as the way to save the economy, just to pump more and more debt into the economy, and that's created this so-called everything bubble, where every asset has arisen. They haven't risen and fallen in contradiction, in counterpoint to each other. They have all risen together. The bubble, the rise in the value of government bonds, the rise in the value of property prices, the rise in the value of share prices, the rise in the value of commercial corporate bonds, the rise in value of car loans. Right across the economy, assets have shot up in value because they have been supported and pumped up by debt. If that changes, now that is changing, with inflation rising and with a long historical rise in interest rates coming, all that debt that has percolated and fermented throughout every sector of the economy, that becomes like plastic explosive stuffed into every nook and cranny of the economy, that those assets they can't get rid of. They can't just offload all that debt suddenly. That they have no way to repay it. All they have to do is to try and meet the rising interest rates, and then go crying to government to bail them out, saying we're too big to fail. If we fail, we'll drag down the whole economy. So you government need to bail us out. So that there is this economy is going to fail. That is going to lead to even more involvement of central banks, as has happened with Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. The central bank got dragged in. The central bank fired Kwasi Kwarteng. It got rid of its tax cut policies, and now it has, basically by refusing to intervene further, it has fired Liz Truss. And we are going to see more involvement, more government from the central banks as they try to print and try to keep the economies afloat. And ultimately, it will not work. I am sticking to the prediction that I made about economies breaking down and then societies breaking down. And I made that prediction because I think that relates to the problems of multicultural invasion. I don't think it's going to get solved by any government. I don't think we are going to press our governments to do it. I think our governments want to continue the multicultural invasion. It will be solved by collapse. After that, people will meet. We will meet our need, our primal need for law, not by submitting to the authority of some government which isn't there, or by submitting to a warlord or a gang leader or a theocrat, but by effectively joining a club that provides a transparent legal system. And no one in their right mind will join one that allows the presence of a lot of third world migration, because no one wants to pay money simply to be subjected to crime, degradation and poverty. And that is how we're going to sort out the problem of multicultural invasion. I think it will be solved as a result of breakdown. And therefore, that is why I have at least tried to say when it will happen. This is how I risk making a fool of myself, because it's not hard to show the way things are going. What is really hard is to put a date on it. That's where everyone makes a fool of themselves, because people are trying to put a date on something that can't be predicted. But to my surprise, my timetable looks to me is, if anything, enhanced. It looks more realistic to me, and that is that in another about 4 or 5 years time, maybe 2026, 27, the phrase I use, the big cracks will start appearing in the economy. We will effectively start to come to realise that this economy, our economies, have stage 4 cancer. They're not going to recover. And then about 4 or 5 years after that, around the end of the decade, that will lead through to social collapse, political breakdown. And that collapse, out of that collapse, we may think we've lost at that point, but that actually is the point at which we will have won, because we will get up fast. I don't relish the idea of economic collapse. I think some very unfortunate people will probably starve, maybe in the hundreds. People will starve. I think there'll be a lot of chaos. People will be killed. Imagine London with no food in it, run by 150 gangs in different areas. That is not a picnic. But I think that coming out of it, we, the English, will find an effective way to organise ourselves. So you don't need to be scared by this, but it is as well, you are going to be less frightened if you are aware of the economic problems that are coming, the economic problems that we are sailing into and that we cannot get out of. We've seen that over the last few weeks. Thank you.